Hello, welcome everyone. Welcome to today's South Carolina Writers Workshop webinar featuring the wonderful Jane Gari. I have a couple of housekeeping items first. You may ask questions using the chat feature, which is the little blue square in the upper left-hand corner. She's going to reserve about 10 minutes at the end to answer questions. If you have something pressing, certainly let me know, but we'll take care of all questions at the end. If you have any questions at the beginning, please feel free to text them in now and we'll see if we can have them answered for you. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce Jane Gari. And I'm not a South Carolina native, so forgive me. I don't know if it's Elgin or Elgin.
It's Elgin.
Elgin. So Jane lives in Elgin, South Carolina with her husband and daughter. And I'm going to read this because she has a very extensive bio. 3 adapted chapters from her memoir, Losing the Dollhouse, were nominated for the Pushcart Prize. The first chapter of her forthcoming novel, Shakespeare's Daughter, has also been nominated for the Pushcart. Her Idiot's Guide to the Healthy Gut, I love that title, is slated for a June 2016 release with Alpha Books, which is a division of Penguin Random House. And Jane has also co-written Flush This Book, which is a collection of humorous essays. And as a person who writes memoirs herself, I'm very interested and very excited to hear this presentation today. So without further ado, Jane, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me today. I'm going to go over just 4 main points and then everything that I talk about today will stem from those 4 points, but certainly feel free to ask anything related to memoir writing and even memoir publishing and the type of specific platform building that goes into being a memoir writer who wants to get their works read, because that really is the difference between writing a memoir for readers and then just journaling for yourself, really. I mean, the goal, I would hope, for you as a writer coming to this webinar today is to see how do you craft a memoir in such a way that you can bring it to market. So the 4 key points that we'll discuss today are: why do you want to write a memoir, which is really, really the crux of your motivation and your intent as a writer. So you want to get your head wrapped around that and make sure that you're in a good emotional and philosophical space when you approach the act of writing memoir. I think that that's very important, or at least the act of editing your memoir. And we'll talk about that specifically. The second point that we're going to talk about is finding your story arc. And a lot of people think about that as being something that deals primarily in writing fiction, but really memoir, it's just as important. We're also going to talk about taking creative license without lying. And that really comes down to the definition of memoir juxtaposed with the definition of a biography. You know, some people think that they are one and the same. They often get lumped together in the bookstore. They get lumped together in the same section of a library. And they even get lumped together in the same sections of Amazon and different Goodreads groups and that type of readership, because they do tend to get some of the similar readers, but they're very different animals. A biography is when you're writing about somebody, or even, and then an autobiography, if you're writing about yourself, you're discussing your birth until now. You know, you're really cataloging an entire life. Memoir is different. You know, memoir is a slice of a person's life. It's a very particular lens that you are using as a writer and approaching a certain theme in your life, a certain event or series of events that are all related in some way and all have something very similar to say about you as a person, and then what other people can tap into about you as a person that will help them find a universal truth, you know, about themselves. All right. So the difference between memoir and biography is key. And that's something that is crucial to this idea of taking creative license without lying. Because in autobiography, because it's a cataloging of events, it's very linear, and memoir doesn't have to be. And in memoir, you also don't want to, because you're writing it a lot like fiction, and that you want it to have a compelling story arc. You can edit your life. And that's why I wanted to call this session The Art of Writing Memoir, editing your life, because you're giving the reader a window into a certain aspect of yourself. And to do that, you do have to edit carefully. You're going to show an event. You don't want to start from the moment that you woke up and go throughout the day and add all these extraneous details. And you don't want to also confuse the reader with extra details if they're not pertinent to the story. And that's not lying. We'll talk about that specifically and where that line gets drawn, because the infamous James Fry and his Million Little Pieces memoir that came out years ago, that kind of defined this delineation between memoir and fiction, then that got people up in arms about memoir as a genre, because he did lie about a lot of things. And you cannot lie in memoir, right? But you can take creative license. And we'll talk about that fine line today. And then the fourth major point that we'll talk about is how to shape friends and family members into characters. And when you use the word character, you think fiction, and you think, well, I don't want to make people who are real life entities in the flesh and blood to me in my life, I don't want to make them into characters. That makes it sound like I'm fictionalizing them. You're not, but you do have to take the essence of who they are and treat them the way that you do characters, in the way that you approach how you write about them. You need to flesh them out the way that you would characters, which is often hard to do, because when you're writing memoir, you're writing about people that you already know, and you know them, and especially yourself. And we often forget that when we're writing memoir, and forget to add details so that you can unpack the essence of that person to someone who is processing that individual as a character that you're painting for them. When you know yourself, and you know your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, your boyfriends, whoever you're writing about, you were there and you knew the emotional essence of who they were. And you knew even small details like what they looked like. And sometimes when you're writing, you get caught up in recounting the event, and you forget to portray the players as characters that the reader can react to and interact with as a reader. So you want to keep fiction in mind when you're writing memoir, just because you need to make sure that you develop the people in the same way that you would someone that you were building from scratch. Because for the reader, you are building those people for scratch. And then the last thing that I'll leave you with before we take questions at the end are just some suggestions for further reading. And there is a handout that goes along with this. And I know that Crystal was kind enough to say that she would, if you private messaged her or emailed her, that she would send it to you. And if you find yourself wanting this later down the line, you can also email me, and I'd be happy to send you a copy as well. And my email is sjanegary@gmail. It's very easy, so I'd be happy to send that handout to anybody who would like it. For the bulk of this presentation, I'm actually going to show you some slides, because I feel like looking at me the whole time will be boring. And also, I have some quotes and some points that I want to go over with you. So I'm going to share my screen with you. And then, Crystal, I'm just going to ask you for a verbal confirmation that you can see my screen once I share it, so I can make sure that the quotes that we're going to be looking at, some specific quotes from people about memoir and some other points. I want to be sure that people can see it. All right, so I'm going to share my screen now, hopefully successfully, and everybody should be able to see my presentation. All right, so Crystal, can you see my screen? Crystal, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay, wonderful. I just wanted, before I continue to refer to things in the presentation, I wanted to make sure that everybody could see it. All right, so this is, again, Writing Memoir, The Art of Editing Your Life. And the major points that we'll talk about are: why do you want to write a memoir? Finding that story arc, taking creative license without lying, and how to shape friends and family into characters. And then, as I promised, at the end, I'll give you some suggestions for further reading. All right, so let's take the first question. And this is really very important. Why do you want to write a memoir? And a lot of people will answer this simply as they have a story that's burning inside of them that they just want to get out. All right, and that's one of the best answers that you can give. One of the worst answers I think people can give is that they want to write for revenge, right? Don't write for revenge, glory, or fame. I can understand the impetus to want to do that, especially if you're writing about someone who's wronged you and you feel like you need to write in order to gain some kind of vindication. But I think that can be a very negative headspace to write from, and you're not going to be able to treat everybody fairly, even the people who've wronged you, because you do want to even those people treat with compassion. Otherwise, your writing will come across as vindictive and vengeful, and that's something that readers will. Some of them might latch onto that and relate to it, but it's really not the best motivation. The best motivation is to want to write, to communicate, and add to the human conversation. And when I say that, I mean you need to have a larger idea that your story connects to. Again, otherwise you're just writing a journal. And we'll speak about that in more specifics in a moment. But I mean, me personally, you know, my memoir, Losing the Dollhouse, is about how my stepfather, sexually harassed me and molested me. And when I told my mother about it years after the fact, she did not believe me. She did not take my side. And when I started writing about those events, I was really just journaling for myself. And I wasn't writing for revenge, but I was definitely writing from a vengeful, angry, vindictive place. And all of that, I thought, you know, one day maybe I'll put it together in something for myself. But it wasn't until I could reach a point where I was writing to communicate and add to the human conversation about betrayal, about abuse, that then I felt I was ready to write a memoir. So if you're writing, especially if it's darker in nature, you want to make sure that you're not writing for revenge. And that brings me to getting emotional perspective, which is something that I definitely had to do. And I know a lot of writers of memoir have to do. Even if you're writing about something that was happy, you don't want to idealize it to the point where it becomes this saccharine, you know, very sweet and overly sentimental piece that you bring to the market. So get emotional perspective and distance before you begin, so you can paint all the players in your story like people and not caricatures. Right? And this is especially true if you're writing about something that was particularly traumatic, because then you lend yourself to having villains and heroes that are so clearly delineated that they're not treated like human beings, that are fully fleshed out and who are complex individuals that you treat fairly and with compassion, even if they have wronged you, because then you're going to be really speaking in authentic places. All right. So you want to make sure that you get emotional perspective and distance. If you're writing and everything is angry, and I mean, it could be very therapeutic. I advise you to definitely go for it, but that might not be what you eventually use, and just be prepared for the truth of that, because you want people to be perceptive. All right. Are you ready to expose yourself and others who are part of the story? And that really is a question that you need to answer, maybe not before you write it, but definitely before you decide that you're going to start marketing it around, and, you know, shopping for an agent or shopping for a publisher. In fact, this was the first question that my agent asked me. She said, okay, are you sure? Because once we set this in motion and look for a publisher, there's no going back. You know, this is going to be out there, and you need to look at what you've written, or look at what you're about to write and what you want to tell, and the truth of that story and all angles of that story that really need to be told to be true to what happened, and say, do I want to open myself up to that, and also others? All right. I had to really wrestle with whether or not I wanted to bring this to market, because I knew my mother would be really angry. And I did worry about litigious issues, and we will talk about those as well. So you want to, speaking of litigious, be ready for the fallout of what and who you expose in your story. There might be people who are very angry. There might be people who are just simply embarrassed. When I went through and edited my book, I realized that there were a couple of people whose last names I mentioned, and that wasn't necessary. It was part of my memory, and someone I knew from childhood. And I was recalling something I actually did to them that was mean when we were kids. It was kind of a this girl, she stuffed her bra, all right? And it was relevant to the childhood piece that I was relaying in that part of the story. And it was something when my friends and I made fun of her for doing that, I felt awful about it afterwards. And I felt it was necessary to recount to show that I am not a perfect person and that I have a mean streak in me that I had when I was younger, and that I preyed upon somebody who was weaker than myself and made fun of them. And I wanted to show that I'm a real person. I'm not painting myself as some perfect hero in my book, because that's not me. But I realized I put this poor girl's last name and I needed to take it out. So even little things like that, you need to make sure that the big players and the little players, are you ready to deal with that? And if you're not, you need to change their names, or you need to change some identifying detail. All right. And then sometimes, and this, I don't mean this to sound morbid, I'm being very sincere. Do you need to wait until people have died before you bring the book to market? You can certainly write it and not tell anybody about it. But when you're ready to put it out there, you need to ask yourself, if you're not willing to deal with the fallout, especially if you're recounting some kind of family drama, or if you're writing something that is about a corporate entity or something that really could have some heavy backlash, you need to brace yourself for it. And if you have to wait until people who are involved passed away, that's something that you need to answer for yourself. All right, and this last bit is about making sure that you are plugging into this larger human conversation. All right. Memoir, a lot of people criticize memoir for being narcissistic, and at its worst, it can be. And if you're just writing about what happened to you and not contributing to a larger idea, then you should just write a journal and make it for yourself and make it therapeutic, and all of that is wonderful. But if you're writing a memoir, you have to go beyond the memoir and tie into bigger social or emotional issues. Otherwise, just write a diary. And again, I'm not saying that to be mean or even to be judgmental. You know, I keep a journal, and I've done that for years, and it's just for me. But when you're writing memoir, you make sure that it's not memoir, and you're tying into either some kind of political issue, some kind of social issue. I'm not saying that we all have to be activists when we're approaching our memoir, but it needs to be about something bigger than you. And that way it taps into the reader's emotional life. And that's where you really, cross into the realm of good literature and really adding something valuable to your readers' lives. Here is a quotable quote on why and when to write memoir. All right, if you can, really get your head wrapped around what this quote from Mary Hornbacher is saying, then you'll know that you're ready, not just to write it, but to bring it to market. And Maria Hornbacher, she is the author of Wasted, a memoir of anorexia and bulimia. And this is what she feels on how memoir is an act of communication. My story in isolation is just a story. But my story, when it reflects the story of the people, is a piece of communication. And if you honestly feel like your story can do that, then you are ready, right? Because it's not just for you, it can be for other people. And that's what you want to keep in mind. Besner is a personal essayist, and this is what she has to say on the balance of when and why to write memoir. The act of writing has the power to strongly shape what we remember or how we frame events. The stories we tell ourselves about our lives literally shape our future. When you write a narrative about a relationship, you are deciding not just how you will remember it, but also how it will impact your future. It is like pouring quick-drying cement over a memory. And that is both the gift and the problem with writing our narratives. Some stories need to be told and locked down before time fades them and leads us to remember either only good things or only bad things. There are some narratives that need to be locked down before time scabs over the pain. Now, I really like this particular quote because I can relate to it so much. And I think that if you start to write memoir, you'll realize that now you've crystallized something permanently in your heart and in your brain. Other members of my family, after reading my memoir have said to me, wow, you have an amazing memory. I said, well, I think it's just because I write everything down. Because in writing, you're making a decision. Like, this is how I'm processing and making sense of what happened to me. And then you're framing and shaping the emotional life of that event for yourself. And then for other people to gain perspective on the issue that happened to you, that can shed light on other people's lives and similar issues and events that happened to them. But that window of time where you can do that successfully is very critical. And that is what I meant earlier by that emotional distance and perspective. You want to do it before you are idealizing everything that happened, or before you are, and not too soon, so that you're writing only about everything being negative. It's a fine line. You got to find that magical time and space. All right, now let's talk about writing in memoir in a way that you find a story arc and convey that to readers. Now, this is really important because this is basically how your readers are going to process your entire narrative. Now, I don't know if you guys remember this little picture at the bottom here of writing this down in middle school and high school English class, and talking about the actual, this is called the Aristotelian model of plot that all of Shakespeare's plays follow and all of the ancient Greek plays follow, and what fiction follows. But it's also what memoir needs to follow. You need to make sure that you have inciting incidents and conflict and rising action and a climax and falling action and a resolution, just like you would for fiction. So then the question is, well, I'm still alive. So how do I do that when I'm looking at my own life? That's where you have to think about what the larger issues are at play in your story and figure out the best starting point to get at that issue. All right, so first, and this is just what I've done, and it may work differently from you, but this is what I find effective. Get your whole story out first for yourself. Just get it out. Start where, if you have to write a paragraph that says I was born, in 1970, and this is, where I lived and grew up. If you need to write a couple of paragraphs or a couple of pages just to find that starting point, then do that and get it out for yourself first. But then edit with the reader in mind. All right, and think of yourself as a reader. And I hope that you're a voracious reader as well as a writer. And if you're not, that's something I'd like to encourage you to change today. And I'll talk about that later with some suggestions for further reading about memoir. But if you have read anything, a short story, a novel, or other memoirs, think about what grabs your attention at the beginning. And is the story really starting where it needs to? We always do that for fiction. And if it doesn't grab us in the first paragraph or so, we probably move on to the next book. Or if we're in a bookstore or just reading an excerpt, we'll move on to the next story. Well, people will do that to your memoir if it's not gripping in the way that fiction can be. So all of those principles that apply to opening pages and opening paragraphs for fiction also apply to memoir. First, write it from beginning to end where you feel the events that lead to the crux of what you want to say in the memoir, whether it's about abuse, whether it's about marriage, whether it's about divorce, whether it's about coping with the loss of a loved one, caring for a loved one, whatever the window of your life is that you want to open and let readers in. Try to figure out, where did that start? Where did it all begin? And just start writing from there. Right? And then when you go back, edit with the reader in mind. Where would the reader want the story to start? And sometimes it might start in the middle and you have to go back and do flashbacks the same exact way that you would do for fiction. Right? Finding the arc then and keeping the reader in mind, you're going to decide on the essence of your story. Where is the center of your story? Because sometimes when we start writing it all out for ourselves, we ramble. All right? You want to find the center. Is it a relationship, a recurring theme, a life-changing event, and the aftermath? Make sure you include a catharsis and an epiphany. That will help you decide how to construct your story. So what I mean by that is, Once you decide, okay, this is where I'm going to start because it's exciting for the reader and offers an emotional window immediately and grips the reader, you want to figure out what you're building up to. Right? So let's just say, if you're writing about the death of a loved one, do you want to start with the death and then work your way backwards and then center on the relationship between you and that person and where you learn something from them, and you want to have a catharsis that was for you that the reader can share? And by catharsis, I mean a moment where you really feel a release of emotion. And an epiphany, basically just a lesson, a moment where you realize something and it crystallized for you in your life. If you can do that and take the reader on that journey, then you have your narrative arc. And that's going to help you decide how to construct your story. How do you get there? How do you build the tension up until that point? Again, the same methods that you use when you're writing fiction. All right, so craft your memoir like a novel. Memoir is not a timeline. Find the cohesive thread that pulls things together. You're looking for one story told over a span of time that a reader can follow. All right, so again, not biography or autobiography. I was born, then I did this, then I did this. You need to find a narrative arc just like you would for fiction. All right, so here's some quotable quotes on finding the story arc in memoir. This is from William Zinsser on writing well. Memoir isn't the summary of a life. It's a window into a life, very much like a photograph in its selective composition. It may look like a casual and even random calling up of bygone events. It's not. It's a deliberate construction. And that's what I was talking about before with plotting it out, the same way you would the plot of a novel. This is from Lamott, who I love, and if you haven't read this book, Bird by Bird, I really recommend it. It's just some instructions on writing and life. She says, if something inside of you is real, we will probably find it interesting, and it will probably be universal. So you must risk placing real emotion at the center of your work. Write straight into the emotional center of things. Write toward vulnerability. Risk being unliked. Tell the truth as you understand it. If you're a writer, you have a moral obligation to do this. And it is a revolutionary act. Truth is always subversive. Right? And that's just kind of a little bit of courage for those of you who might be writing about something that you are afraid of, or like I was very afraid that my mother was going to have an issue with what I wrote. But to be honest with you, she has responded very well and is proud of me for telling my own truth, even if she might not agree with it. So, you want to just try your best to get at the emotional heart of things. Right now, I'm sorry if I'm being people are letting me know that I'm starting to sound scratchy, and I'm not sure if that is a sound quality on my end. I'm not seeing anything going on with my computer, so I will just try my best here. This is another quote on finding a story arc from Danny Shapiro, who wrote Slow Motion, which is a memoir of a life rescued by tragedy. I discovered that memoir is not a document of a fact. It isn't a linear narrative of what happened so much as a document of the moment in which it is written. The present moment acts almost as a transparency, an overlay resting atop the writer's history. The interplay of these two planes, the present and the past, the me now and the me then, create the narrative and the voice. One can't exist without the other. Right? And this is about you finding the narrative arc from your present now and figuring out how to play around with that, right? And you're going to also have your own perspective from now, looking back at the events of your past. And so that is going to intrude on your memoir. That's inevitable, but it's a good perspective to have because it will help you figure out the best way to unpack your story. Right now, this is the tricky part here, right? To take creative license without line. All right, and it can be done. This is what I mean by taking creative license without lying. All right, you're going to tell the truth with the freedom of knowing the detail police aren't coming. All right, that still sounds like we're in a gray area. All right. The most important thing is the story and the reader's interaction with that story. So that's where you decide how you're going to to tell this, all right? And how you're going to maybe leave out details if they are extra, and it would be something that would just confuse the reader. So if a detail doesn't add anything and might confuse a reader and end up lending itself to pointless info dumping, then ditch that detail. If you don't know that term, info dumping, it's when we've all seen novels that start like this, where all of this backstory is just laid on us, and we just want something to happen. We just want to be on it as a need-to-know basis. All right, so you have to do the same thing with yourself. All right, when you're writing your draft and you're just writing, I was born in Chicago in 1960, and you're going on and on and on, that's fine for you to get it out. But when you edit it, don't do that. And if it's not necessary, if you can still get at the emotional essence of that story, like Anne Lamott is saying, you want whatever you say to be universal. And if you stray from that and you're adding these extra details that you feel compelled to add because they happen to you and they're true, but they don't add anything, then you don't need to include it. Another example of doing this and making sure you're telling the truth, right? Don't change what happened, but no, you can compress time, eliminate people from scenes, change small details to protect identity, include dialogue, even if you can't remember it exactly, as long as it's true to the emotional atmosphere of the memory. Right? This is what I mean by that. All right. You can, you can say, let's just say an event happened over the course of a month, but you know that that's going to sound very boring to readers. You can take it and make it happen in the course of just like a day or two. All right. You can say, the dialogue, right? None of us can remember exactly what happens, like in terms of the conversation, but we remember the gist and we remember how we felt in those moments. So as long as you stay true to that, you're going to be staying true to the truth. Okay? Some people feel like they can't include dialogue because they don't remember exactly what everybody said. All right, Crystal, did you have any questions for me that might be coming in? Because when I share my screen, I can then not see the picture within a picture. So I don't know if there are questions that people have at this point that are just really pressing.
Hi, everyone. I hope you're getting some great information. And please don't feel like you need to take this down, because all of this will be in the handout that you'll receive after the webinar, and I'll get that out to you. But if you do have questions, make sure you type them and get them out there, and she'll be happy to answer them. We have lots of great information here. Thanks, Jane.
Okay, thank you. All right, so you can, this is just taking creative license by staying true to the emotional atmosphere of the memory and including dialogue that just gets the gist. All right? Tell the truth of your memory as you remember it. As long as you do that, you're going to be in great shape. All right. Like some people get caught up. You want to still weave a scene the same way that you would for fiction. So if you don't remember exactly what you were wearing, those are the types of details that you can still add something. If you know something happened in winter, you can still talk about buttoning your coat. You can still talk about certain specifics because you know that they must have been true in that moment. All right, the detail police are not coming. Just stay true to that. All right, the most important thing is to not withhold secrets, or the effect will be disingenuous. Memoir is the place where you can at least control how secrets are told. Right, and this includes secrets about yourself. Right, so I'm not saying divulge your deepest, darkest secrets if that's not the memoir that you're writing. But if there's a secret, and especially an emotional secret that is relevant to that particular incident that you're writing about, and you hold it back because you're afraid it's going to make you appear too vulnerable, or it's going to put somebody else out to dry, right? A reader will catch on to that. They might not be able to put their finger on it and be able to label it exactly, but they'll know that something's off, and they'll feel like for some reason now the narrative doesn't seem entirely authentic, and you want to approach memoir as a bear-all genre. That's what it's meant to be. And if you do that, and this goes back to what Anne Lamott says about writing to the emotional center of things. If you do that, you can control how that secret is shaped up in the reader's mind, right? And then you will feel a catharsis, and that will lend itself to the narrative arc, and that will lend itself to getting at the truth, and making sure that you are not lying, right? And you're taking creative license in a way that creates a valuable story for the reader. Quotable quote on telling secrets. This is from Frederick Leuschner, author of Telling Secrets. He says, secrets tell what is perhaps the central paradox of our condition, that what we hunger for perhaps more than anything else is to be known in our full humanness. And yet that is often just what we also fear more than anything else. And I sit for a second after reading that because it's powerful every time I read it. But this kind of goes back to why you want to write a memoir. You do want to be known. There's something about you and your story that you want other people to know and to know you for. And if you do it in a way that writes to the emotional center of your own truth, it will be universal. If you take creative license, but you don't lie and you are telling the truth and you don't hold back and you tell your secrets and make yourself vulnerable, people will respond. They will respond to the humanness in you, because you're speaking to the humanness in them. All right, so take comfort. We all have those secrets, and if you share them, it will definitely hit a chord with readers. All right, here's another from Anne Lamott, and this is probably one of her most famous quotes, and it speaks to the essence of how to shape friends and family into characters. All right. This is also from Bird by Bird, and she wrote, "You own everything that happened to you. Tell your stories. If people wanted you to write warmly about them, they should have behaved better." This is often taken out of context to mean that you should go for broke and crucify people if they wronged you. And I don't think, given everything else that she's written about memoir writing, I don't think that's what she means. But I do think she means that if someone did wrong you, you shouldn't hold back about discussing it in detail. But make sure that you treat them with compassion. And that's what we'll talk about next. All right. Making real people into characters is a challenge. And I went over that in the overview very briefly. But it's something that you need to do to be authentic. Write about them as they are, or as they were, if you're talking about somebody who is deceased. If they are antagonists in your story, or they would be embarrassed or even litigious, meaning they would sue you, right? This is how you get around that. Right? Change the names and something minor about them that doesn't disrupt the essence of who they are and doesn't sacrifice the story or its meaning. All right? And if you are even worried about it, or you have a question in your mind and you're saying, should I change that person's name? Then just do it. There was, in my memoir, there was a teacher who sexually harassed me at work. And when he was harassing me, I saw that he was also sexually harassing students. And I went to the administration, and there was an investigation, and in the end, nothing was done. He basically was, punished by having to sit in a district office and write papers, but he was still getting paid, and he's still collecting a New York State pension. And I needed to be very careful that I didn't name those people involved in the investigation of him, and I didn't name him, and I didn't give the last name of the students involved. I didn't want to embarrass them. I didn't want the teacher to sue me, even though what happened was documented and true. It just wasn't worth the aggravation to me. Right? You can decide for yourself, but these are the types of details that you want to mull over in your mind when you're deciding how you're going to shape your friends and family into characters. Are you going to give them their real names? Are you going to change them? If you have the slightest bit of doubt. And even like that girl with the bra stuffing incident I told you about, that seems like such a minor thing, and there's no legal issue there, but I didn't want to embarrass her. But I wanted to tell the truth about myself. So get your perspective, change a name, and let's say the person's blonde. I mean, you can write that they're a brunette. That again is taking creative license without lying. You're doing that to protect that person. I'm not changing anything about the meaning of the story or the overall message of the story by saying that someone drove a Ford when they really drove a Chevy, right? You can get around those things so that you still have your character and you still have your story. Treat everyone who walks on stage in your plot like a character who needs to be well developed. And we've spoken to this, earlier today, but I cannot stress it enough. Otherwise, you run the risk of a two-dimensional character or someone who comes across as only a villain or someone who comes across as only a hero. That's just not what people are going to respond to. You want to make sure that they're fully fleshed out because they are real people or they were real people. So treat them as such. Find some kind of flaw in the hero and find something that we can relate to in that villain. Give them a vulnerable moment. Try to rack your brain to think of some kind of vignette that you could put in there, some description that makes us see even a perpetrator as a human being. And it will just add that much more depth and authenticity to your story. Remember, you know them because you bring your own real life hands-on experience with them as real people. The reader knows nothing until you build it. All right, so make sure you build it. Make sure that you describe them. In my first draft of my memoir, I realized that I never physically described myself or several other people. And so I just had to go back there. I wrote for myself, but I edited with the reader in mind. I needed to make sure that I was building a world just like I would for fiction. You also want to focus on characterizing mannerisms, speech patterns, physical features, vignettes that reveal their character in a brushstroke. So by that I mean, how do they speak? Do they have a certain connective phrase that they use a lot, such as like or you don't want to get overt about it, but you want to include it at some point. Did they have catchphrases that they used? Did they have certain ways that they posed a question? What was their body language like? I mean, this is something that you live with and maybe even grew up with every day, and you often take for granted those things. But like if you're writing about your parents and you're trying to capture their mannerisms, if you have siblings, ask them, like, hey, what do you think of when you think of mom? And you'll probably end up with a whole list of mannerisms to choose from that you can pepper throughout your narrative to really get somebody to understand the essence of who that person was, how they walked, how they moved around the room, how they smoked their cigarette, how they prepared food. You want to take those things into consideration, and their physical features as well, which is one of the major things that memoir writers take for granted because you see them in your mind while you're writing. And then vignettes, like little scenes that reveal their character in a brushstroke. A simple act of kindness that a villain, that you watch the person who maybe wronged you. You remember how they cared for a sick family pet. And that can be how you give them a little bit of humanity in the midst of maybe what they had done to you. And remember, you are a character too. Make yourself a complex, well-developed character. You're going to be showing throughout the memoir because it centers around something that happened to you. You're going to show what you did and what you said, and make sure that you're doing it in character revealing ways, the same way you would for fictional characters. Make sure that you get to the center of your emotional truth. And perhaps the biggest piece of advice that I can give you that to really get your head wrapped around this and get a handle on memoir writing is to read memoirs. It's the best way you'll prepare yourself for writing and editing your own. This book that I have up here, Stephen King on Writing, I know that a lot of people are always recommending it, but I have to continue to sing its praises. I reread it every year because it's just that good, and it just cuts to the chase about what we should be doing. And it's his memoir. So it's a twofer there. You can read a memoir about writing and get better at memoir writing all at the same time. All right, so he says, you cannot hope to sweep someone else away by the force of your writing until it has been done to you. If you don't have the time to read, you don't have the time or the tools to write. The trick is to teach yourself to read in small sips as well as in long swallows. Book buyers want a good story to take with them on the airplane. Something that will first fascinate them, then pull them in and keep them turning the pages. This happens when readers recognize the people in a book, their behaviors, their surroundings, and their talk. Right, so if you read memoir writing, you're going to see how other people treat memoir writing like fiction, and how they build worlds, how they build characters so that you can better build yours. And I have some specific suggestions for you. I'm actually going to show you the reading list that's part of the handout. All right? But one of the memoirs that I want to call your attention to is actually, I've highlighted it here on my screen, and I hope everybody can see it. But this is an author named Carrie Cohen. And she was actually kind enough to write a blurb for my memoir, and I was floored and humbled by that because I admire her writing so much. And she's written 2 memoirs. One is Loose Girl, a Memoir of Promiscuity, and then another, Seeing Ezra, a mother's story of autism, Unconditional Love, and the Meaning of Normal. And they're 2 very, very different memoirs. So if you want an exercise in how one person can give you separate windows into very different slices of their lives, Carrie Cohen is an excellent example, because Loose Girl is about her youth and her misguided decisions that she made in searching for love and just having a really troubled adolescence. And then the second one, Seeing Ezra, is about her as a mother, and you can see her development as a human being and how she deals with, having a son with autism. And then the other book that I want to recommend by her is entirely relevant to everything that we've talked about today. And that's the book that she wrote. It's just prescriptive nonfiction, but it's called The Truth of Memoir: How to Write About Yourself and Others with Honesty, Emotion, and Integrity. And it's really a must read for anyone who's even thinking about writing a memoir, because what she does is kind of crowdsources advice about how to write memoir from other memoir authors. So if you have really specific legal questions, or if you just want to see what other memoir writers' experience was as they were writing, and also as they were bringing the book to market, and how they navigated the fallout that you might be fearing, this book is just an excellent and valuable resource. I didn't read it until about a month before my book launched last year, and I wish that I had read it while I was in the middle of writing it. I think it would have given me the courage to reach out to my mother before the week before my book launch, and I would have felt so much more relaxed and just confident. And so if you're thinking about writing a memoir about anything, she researched it very, very well. All right. So that is, in a nutshell, like what I have to say about memoir writing and about the reading resources that I have available to you, and just about the major points that I wanted to cover today. All right. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and hopefully that will happen successfully. All right. And if you have any questions at all, I would love to field them, and then I can speak to specifically, if you want, about platform building as a memoir author and how to bring a memoir to market.
Jane, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, we have one question for you so far. Okay, so the question is this, about eliminating characters in a scene. This writer has 7 characters in a traumatic accidental death scene, which truly happened, but feels that 7 is too many for the reader to keep track of. How does she decide who to cut and who to keep?
That's an excellent question. I would say look at where you might use the other characters later in your story. And if all 7 of them are going to be integral throughout the entire narrative, then you could do that successfully. But you probably don't have that many people being that integral to your story throughout. So look at your book as a whole, and whoever crops up later, keep them. And I would say in that particular kind of scene, maybe 3 other people might be all the reader might be able to really gather in their mind and hold them there. I had something very similar with writing my own memoir. I had a really good core group of friends, of girlfriends that I'm still friends with to this day, who helped me navigate the process of just trying to tell my mom about my stepfather's advances, and just they were with me in that process, and they were with me as I was living it, and they knew something was wrong before I even talked about it with them. But to have 4 or 5 people throughout an entire book that I was close with and talking about these things all the time was really difficult. So I chose one who was there with me in every single part of that journey that I had with my family. So that's my advice to you, is look at who are the people who are then important for the journey of the entire book, and then cut from there. Okay, now I can't hear you now. I don't know why.
All right, let's try this. Is this better? Okay, good. Thank you. That was a great answer. If we have any other questions, please let me know. I know Jane gave her email address, which was very wonderful. And I will get the information. All of these slides that you saw will get sent to you today. I apologize. I know there was a little bit of a feedback, and I just want to say that was not any doing of Jane's. This is webinar on air. I think it's just a technology issue, but the information that she presented was wonderful. I interviewed 15 older people and to capture their life stories, and wrote about a 2,500 to 3,000 word story on each of them. And I wish I'd had this webinar before I did that, Jane. So thank you. Are there any other questions today? Now's the time, or send her an email. Jane, I want to thank you so much. Do you want to close the presentation?
Absolutely. One of the things I'm going to close with what I wish somebody had told me before I launched my memoir, that while I was writing it, I should have considered building a platform, which kind of becomes an ugly word among those of us who really just want to work on our craft and be left alone to do that. But I have found that writing a blog that is directly related to the content of my memoir has been a wonderful experience. I was reluctant at first. I did it because my agent told me to. And I really was dragged into it kicking and screaming at first. And I did other things I was supposed to do, reaching out and networking on social media. And I had a website, but it wasn't a living, breathing thing. So my advice is to find the crux of your story, and to start reaching out now to other people who share that in common, so that you have a built-in community of people who are already interested in aspects of your story. And certainly I would put Google alerts on things that are related to your content. So for me specifically, I have Google alerts on sexual harassment and sexual abuse. And anything that happens in the news pops up in my mailbox. And so because I said, how can I possibly continue to write a blog about something that's just me? You can't. So I make it about the human conversation about it. So when something pops up in my mailbox, I look at that news story and I look at somebody else's story and I say, how can I, relate to this and have readers engage with this? And you just write a short piece about it. Just, it can be just 2 or 3 paragraphs, and it sharpens your skills and your discipline as a writer. And it starts to reach out and build a community of people who will then be readily responsive to your larger story when you bring it to market. And you don't have to look at it as you're not being a writer, you're being a marketer, or you're being disingenuous. You're not. You're building a community, and you're adding to the larger human conversation that your story is a part of.
Great advice. Great advice. All right, well, I don't have any other questions that came in. So Jane, I want to say thank you again. This was wonderful information. Everybody stay warm and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you. I'm sorry about the, I don't know, I was sitting kind of the same distance from my microphone, but I don't know if maybe I leaned forward at some points. Maybe that's what caused it.
I think honestly it was a webinar on air issue. I don't think it was you. If you didn't move and do anything, if there's no other setting environmental changes, it wasn't you, and that's why I took responsibility for it. So it was just a little scratchy, but it didn't detract from the message. So no worries. And
okay, so it wasn't just feedback. It wasn't like a loud noise that was obscuring the voice.
No.
Okay, that's good.
No, it was fine. And I was able to see where to access the emails. So I will take care of getting the document you sent out to everyone, okay?
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
All right, and thank you. Thank you.
Sure. Have a great day.